Welcome to Choose the Nickel. I'm your host, George Bailey. My co-founder and technical support is the gorgeous Christina Bailey. This podcast is about giving kids financial freedom. We're interviewing fascinating people for their insights about how children learn to be financially savvy. Our guests come from diverse, sometimes conflicting schools of thought, and we love the opportunity to learn from them. We encourage all to weigh our guests' ideas on how to help children thrive, both financially and in general. We invite you to visit our website at www.choosethenickel.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and try out the things we are learning on the podcast. Our next guest is Veta Jeffery, Senior Vice President of Community and Economic Development for Midwest BankCentre and Executive Director for the Heartland St. Black Chamber of Commerce. Veta has spent her life fighting for the rights of others and began her professional career advocating for individuals with disabilities. She has worked for 18 years in the financial services industry as a licensed professional and has been awarded and recognized for her ability to develop leaders in business and the community. Ladies and gentlemen, Veta Jeffery. Veta Jeffery, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, George. I'm excited to be here today.
Very excited to have you on the show. And it's not often I get to have a friend that I've known for a little while longer on the show. I think that we're going to have a really great conversation. I wanted to find out from you. I was looking over your track record in finance and was just really impressed. You've done a lot of work. You've done a lot of work for the community. You've been recognized for the work that you've done nationally. I wanted to ask, what is your driving passion for the work that you're doing?
George, that's a great question, and I think I'd have to go back quite some time. I've been around money as my primary focus now since the early 90s. So it's a long time to just kind of be around understanding how money works and teaching how money works. But even if I go back before that, my dad was an entrepreneur. I guess I learned early on the strengths, the challenges that come along with having a good understanding with money, because when you're an entrepreneur, you have high highs and low lows. And so that was my first experience. I watched our family experience the highs and lows. And then when I became old enough to get my own career going, I stumbled into an opportunity to get my licenses in the market. And I've been running ever since. And I started finding out that people really didn't spend the time to understand money the way they understood everything else. We all grow up wanting to go to college and get our jobs or whatever they are. But we don't grow up saying, man, I want to master money. I want to understand how interest rates work. Or I want to know what the market is. We grow up thinking about, I want to get this job, or I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever the latest crave is. And we go off without any thought of, once I earn these wonderful paychecks that we all thought we'd make, what do I do with it then? And so my passion has been just being able to connect those two worlds in a way that it's not intimidating for the people that we're working with. Kind of had that mix, that experience and entrepreneur watching it firsthand, and then just going off understanding that people really were intimidated and didn't get to know about money on their own.
Why do you think that people are so intimidated? I've got my own theories, but I don't know if I've got it pinned down.
George, that's a great thought to look at. And I think that money is a bit intimidating because we grow up in a society, cash reigns. It's a capitalistic society where, for one thing, people are judged by the purchases that they make, unfortunately, that they make or that they don't make, or how well they do or don't handle their monies. We've worked really hard at making sure that we teach community and corporate that people should not be judged by their credit score. But we've grown up in a society to where that's really been what's ruling. And if that credit score doesn't reflect who you really are, or if it's such a low number that you're paying more for where you live or what you drive or what you purchase, it has a mental effect on people's everyday life. And so they tend to get intimidated because they don't know all the ins and outs. Once they've worked themselves in a hole, they don't know how to get out of those holes. Once they've found their life being affected, whether it's divorce, whether it's depression, it's unfortunate that there are some people that have had such financial thoughts go sour that they've taken their own life. So it affects so much of who we are. It's almost an automatic caste system that people have been placed in. And except that we work to change that, it's intimidating because people find themselves in a space they just don't want to be in.
You've addressed in other interviews that I've seen this emotional connection that we have with money, and there is this thing called emotional spending. What is it that our communities need from financial professionals to be able to mitigate the harms of this?
Emotional spending is something that we talk about on a regular basis because especially during the holidays, you find people out here making commitments that go way beyond what their plans were. And so oftentimes in communities of lack, you have people that want to make up for the lack that they experience with their children. And so they'll go out and try to keep up with the latest craze as a way to make up for the fact that they've had to suffer, or that there's been some things throughout the year they've had to go without. And we try to teach our financial professionals just to be able to look at this from a different side and understand where people are coming from. First of all, we've already touched on the fact that when it comes to money, which spins over into our financial institutions, people are approaching those subjects from a position of already being intimidated. So if you add the intimidation they feel in terms of dealing with the people who actually have the knowledge, and then you add the emotional insecurities that people are facing themselves with in terms of out here making purchases that they've not planned for, or making purchases that aren't always wise, meaning they're buying something, but the interest rate that's been tacked on it is 3, 4, 5 times what it really should be, so they're paying more for it. So that's putting them behind the gun also. And then also understanding that when it comes time to fix the problems that's been created, people have a hard time talking to our financial professionals to do so. So they continue trying to fix the problems that this brain created with the same brain that created it, as opposed to allowing the professionals to walk us through how to get out of these holes. And so we talk to financial professionals about how to bridge that gap, how to see people beyond the mistakes that they've made financially, and then walk them into a trusted relationship so that they can make healthier decisions, so that they can have healthier outcomes. And then that way, year after year, people aren't finding themselves in the same ruts that they've been stuck in, leaving them hopeless, so that they feel like, I'm in a cycle right now that I'll never be able to get myself out of, so why do I even keep trying? And then you find people becoming despondent. You find people turning to alternate measures of how to make themselves feel worthy, if I could use the word, just because of mistakes that they've made financially.
I want to add another layer of complexity to the emotional problem with money, and that is having kids. Because once you have those kids, you feel, I do this as a parent, anything that my kids cannot do because our income is limited, I bear that. And it's very challenging. And then, of course, I perpetuate some of those same insecurities further along. And so I think that there's a real generational aspect to this as well.
I agree with you. I'm going to add another thought to that, though, George, because that's one side. Anything that your child isn't able to experience, whether it's local or not, your kid is watching Disney World on TV every day, and you've not taken your kid to Disney World, and suddenly you're trying to make up for that. You do so making bad decisions. But then you've got the parent over here who does have the finances, but they don't have the time. And so what they end up doing is putting their child in position to, they've got all of these wonderful little gadgets and opportunities, but they don't have the parent. And both of those experiences are equally impactful on the kid's view of money and how it affects the decisions that they grow into making. And so we've got to be able to get a hold of what we do emotionally with our finances so that we meet in the middle and we raise children to be healthily financially as well.
Very powerful. Thank you very much for those thoughts. Now, I'd like to go back to your childhood. Tell me about your own experience of learning about money. You mentioned a little bit about your father and his work as an entrepreneur. Give me a little bit of an insight of Veta as a child.
That's interesting. I often tell people, George, I didn't realize that we were broke growing up. My parents, I don't know if they did a great job of just masking it from me or if we didn't pay attention to the signs or didn't understand what the signs were. But I didn't grow up feeling stressed financially. We had what we had. We didn't have what we didn't have. And that was just our experience. But becoming an adult and looking back, what I recognize is that my parents were juggling a lot, just trying to make ends meet. I mentioned the fact that my dad was an entrepreneur. He was in the sales industry, and I remember as a kid, he actually sold Kirby's. He was the first African-American Kirby salesman in Missouri to run his own business to any great extent. And so I was with him, on his heels as he would go into homes and spread dirt on the floor and get this wonderful machine back then that was probably still costing hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And it was the best thing, that was going to clean. And they had their Kirby Will Shine Tonight song, and he'd spread the dirt on the floor and use the machine to clean it all up. And then after he showed how magnificently it could clean the floor, it had the gadget that was going to clean the furniture, and it was going to clean the curtains, and this was the one gadget that every home had to have. Well, sales could be good or bad. He put people on these payment plans, and when business was really, really good, my parents would travel all over the country at all these wonderful little sales meetings that they'd win. But when sales were down or when things were bad, then that's when we experienced lack. And the one thing that it exposed me to was understanding that I wanted to kind of stabilize things once I got a little older. Instead of having high highs and low lows, I grew up with the thought that I wanted my life to kind of be smooth sailing financially. But as fate would have it, I ended up just like my dad going into a sales industry where I learned early on high highs and low lows. And so it took me having great success and then making varying other career changes to kind of balance out and become what I thought I would be as a child. But what I took from that is a long-standing career of recognizing people's finances and understanding what I'm looking at. And so I've dedicated my career to being able to walk people through those painstakingly high highs and low lows and how to get their household balanced financially, regardless of what their income generating opportunities look like. So I've dedicated my life to working with entrepreneurs, to varying business owners, to professionals, and showing them how to connect those dots in a way that they can be financially sound.
First of all, I think it's really interesting that you found yourself repeating that same process and, that
Sure.
you were aware enough of what was really going on as it was happening, of course. And I think that can be really challenging because every once in a while, and this isn't necessarily about money, but I'll listen to myself and I'm like, holy cow, I sound like my dad, have one of those weird, insights and whatnot. Now, this is out of curiosity and fun. I just got to ask. It has nothing to do with money. But what are your feelings toward vacuum cleaners now?
I can say I definitely probably have a more personal relationship than most just because of what I see. Absolutely so.
And okay, so and I got to ask you too, are you like a clean freak at all?
I am, but I also have a realistic family, and so I run around after them picking up and wanting to vacuum in between the crevices of the couch. They make sure I never run out of work to do. Let me say that.
Man, I'll tell my own little story here just because it's funny. And I won't name the company, but I will name the product, and that was vacuum cleaners. I had one of those people come over to our house few years ago, and I just started out in sales. So I was just like, look, I'm going to at least give him a chance. But I told him, I said, I am not going to buy your product. I was really clear. And that guy was at our house. We were trying to get rid of that guy for like 3 hours. Like his boss left him there and he had nowhere to go with this vacuum cleaner. And, for me, I was just like, look, I love a good vacuum cleaner as much as the next person, but that was a little bit intense.
Sure. It all goes back to sales. Sales is hard. And so they make a certain kind of person is created in that industry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's great. So tell me a little bit more about you as a child. Tell me about you and your mom.
You know, one of the things that mom and dad, I often talk about how children mimic the behavior that they see. And so oftentimes it's not what we say to them, it's what we show them that makes a big difference. My parents walked me in to get my first Passbook savings account when I was a really young kid. And I was excited to be able, every time we went to deposit money into that account, and then they were stamping my book to show me how that was growing. And that habit was instilled in me. I almost wish that we had Passbook savings accounts now for children, because it was just so impactful on me, watching my parents do it and them taking me to do it, and then growing up and being able to kind of watch as those accounts grow. So now, quite naturally, our children have them.
I got to confess, though, Veta, you're saying Passbook? I don't even know what that is.
Absolutely.
I'm going to publish this. I put this out there. Oh, no, I'm going to publish this. And there's going to be probably half my listeners are going to be like, who are you?
I know, right?
But you got to tell me right now. I really want to know.
So absolutely, that's hilarious. And, you know, in modern times, you know, we've moved to having an app on our phone that tracks everything. But back in the olden days, as my daughter would call it, you know, our 8-year-old saw a car that had, you know, you rolled the window down manually. It didn't have the button. And she called it an olden days car. So back in the olden days, you know, back when people still had to manually roll their windows down, Bankfoot, and when you opened an account, especially for kids, but you opened a savings account, you'd get two things. You'd get this little bitty half of an 8.5 by 11 sheet that was folded over and it had multiple pages. And they'd go in and they would stamp the date, and then they'd write in the amount of your deposit, or if you got to withdraw, so that you could keep up. They helped you keep up with organizing your book and tracking your spending and saving. But in addition to that, they'd also give you this wonderful, nifty little card, and some banks still do this, but it would fold out and you could go in and you would have quarter slots. And you'd save your quarters, and once you filled that card up, you'd bring it in and they deposit it into your Passbook savings account. You know, this goes back to early banking. It's not just for people who were born in olden days like my modern time. This went back to early banking in the 1900s and later 1800s of how people were able to keep track of what that savings was and what those spendings were. And I just think it's a great motivator for people to be able to have something that they can go in and touch. But mind you, we do live in an age now, this modern time, where people have apps on their phones that instead of them having to go in and have somebody physically stamp it, they actually get to record what they're doing and have that same kind of warm experience in terms of growing their accounts the way that we did back then.
Yes. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I bet that there's a good portion of my listeners who appreciate that as well. So
good deal.
All right. So
anytime I can help you keep up with yesteryear.
Yeah. The funny thing is, like, you're really not old, Veta, you know?
I had old parents, and so they showed me what life was like. So I love being able to cross all across the generations.
I love it. Okay. Well, if you could tell me, what is your favorite story from your childhood?
Man, you know, my favorite story, we're in the holiday time of life. My favorite story was just the innocence of being able to share holiday experiences with family. Yes. I'm a softie when it comes to the Christmas season time of year, when you get to hear all of the Christmas music, and it's just a time of joy and cheer for me. And for me, it's not even about all of the money or the gifts that people can't give. I grew up at a time when people were still caroling. So we used to go Christmas caroling, you know, knocking on people's doors and singing. I was in youth groups and singing groups that did that. I grew up at a time where we would make gifts and not always focus on what you were buying. And those are the ones that I cherish the most. And then there's the joy of just waking up Christmas morning. My parents didn't wrap the gifts early and put them around the tree. Now, mind you, George, I'm sure now that's probably because I had the kind of family that they might have had all the gifts in the will call or the layaway, and they may have been in line Christmas Eve getting it.
Yeah.
So they didn't have the gifts wrapped under the tree weeks before. We woke up Christmas morning to whatever our gifts were, and they'd be sprawled out throughout the room, and we were excited. And some weren't wrapped because Santa had brought the gifts that weren't wrapped, and then there were some that were wrapped because those are the gifts that our parents gave us, and we just had that joy. But for us, we got to spend the day. We had the fruit bowls that were mixed with fruits and nuts and candies that you'd only get Christmas Day. My mom was really big on making sure that Santa brought us orange slices every year. So our Christmas fruit looked different, but we could always count on those orange slices. And that particular day, the rest of the world stopped, the angst, whatever issues were going on, we stopped and settled down for that one day. And we just got to share in the joy of family, sharing the joy of the exchange, the camaraderie, the singing, and just enjoy that feeling that it brought. So for me, this time of year is filled with that type of warm experience, not even so much of focusing on what the gift-giving piece is, but focusing on just the love and joy and cheer that we were able to share with our neighbors and with one another. And so for me, I've taken that on with my children. Even in this year, I'm more excited about things to give that are made this year as opposed to what we are buying somewhere else, because it just kind of brings that nostalgia back for me.
Wow. Thank you very much. You give me two thoughts, and one of them is maybe a little bit of encouragement about the caroling piece. I actually went with my children out to carol this last week. It was a part of a Cub Scout outing and whatnot. And we caroled. And what was really funny to me, and it was a little bit telling, was that as we did so, a couple of the folks that we caroled, and normally when I grew up, when my family caroled, we didn't carol random strangers. We caroled friends, and it was very fun and very wonderful. But this time we caroled random strangers. And a couple of the times they asked us, "Oh, are you guys, are you raising funds for a charity or something like that?" And it took me back a little bit, and I thought, like, good heavens, do we always have to be asking for something?
Right.
To give something? That really jumped out to me, and so I thought maybe caroling for Christians, and if you're not a Christian and you're not a believer, maybe just go sing at people's homes.
Absolutely.
Don't ask anything.
It does as much for the caroler as it does for the recipient thereof. So no, we're just here, to spread this joy.
Yeah.
So absolutely. I love that story. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, not a problem. Though I kind of wonder, though, if you weren't caroling Christmas carols, what would you be singing? Just walk up to someone's door and singing, another one bites the dust. Let's do that one.
I
don't know. I think
it would absolutely create a memory.
It would create
a
memory. I think we got something, Veta. Okay, next year, maybe during the summer. Okay. Any case, but the second thought, you gave me a second thought, and that is, I wonder, and I'd like to get your feedback on this. Can we create those stressless days more often in the year? And if so, how often? Because naturally, I think we're all expected to do so during Christmas, but I suspect that we can create those memories a lot more often.
Absolutely, we can. One of the things you asked earlier about what was my driving passion behind all of this work that we're doing in these financial fields. The piece I think that's the biggest motivator is understanding that we've got to make a mental shift across the board, across our communities. I think as we begin getting these messages out and helping people think differently about money, about their experience with money, about how money runs their family, their lives, their children, their relationships, all of that. I was talking to a gentleman a little bit ago. There are about 550,000 different podcast shows now. Wow. And I was thinking about that number, and I'm just in awe of thinking about that's 550,000 what I'll call TV shows, but podcast shows. And if we could get people focused on helping to shift, we've got a lot of people out here who talk about just claim your best you and be your best you and yada, yada, yada. But I want to make sure that we don't lose helping people shift mentally, even their approach. What's their relationship with money? You know, we grow up and we get married, and oftentimes when we marry, we're bringing two completely different approaches to our finances. In the husband's household, the mom may have handled the finances, and in that particular wife's household, the dad may have handled it, or if somebody might have even grown up in a single household. How do we marry those two different varying schools of thought? In my particular household, I'm the saver and my husband's the spender. And so that's atypical. Usually, if ever there was a traditional household, it had been the other way around. But how do we look at what those emotional connections are, what that mentality is towards money and how it controls us, how we approach, what's that love relationship with our finances look like, and how we change and shift how it affects our life? That's the piece that I think we get to all work more on together, and exposing our children earlier on and not being afraid to expose ourselves. We've got to be willing to become continual lifetime learners to change whatever was embedded in us early on if it's not working for us today, and never be willing to feel like we're too old to be a student to take something new on. So the work that you and your wife are doing through these wonderful podcasts, and the fact that you take on the subject of money, and some of the phenomenal speakers that you guys have had come on, if we could allow podcasts like this to stay prevalent and get as much traction and get in front of as many people as we can, then we begin to shift the mentality that shifts the relationships that people are having with money. Then we'll be making changes in our families, in our churches, in our communities, in our government, all across the board. And that, to me, would be something that's powerful and worth us looking at, just what kind of message we've left behind us as we move forward.
I totally hear you there, and I agree. I appreciate your message. I think it's very encouraging. If you could name one false idea about either money or business that you would love to get out of the minds of parents so that they do not spread that idea further to children. And it can be any idea, whether it's about the stock market, about insurance, about savings accounts, about the work culture. What would that idea be?
I would do away with the thought that poverty is an account number. I believe that poverty is a reflection of a bank account. I think that poverty is a mindset. I think that if we could get away with thinking that poor equals bank or lack thereof, then we'd be on to something. Because there are wealthy people that don't have a lot of money in the bank, as well as there are poor people that have a lot of money in the bank. It's once we fix our mindset and our ideologies, then there's no limit to where we can take people. The poor will always be among us is a scripture that we were teaching. And I think that refers to more than just bank. I think it refers to how we think and how we behave. So if I could do away with people assigning how they are categorized with just how much money they have in the bank, I think then we could begin to level set the playing field for people to get on a different equal ground and then feel rich based on how they think, how they function, and how they move forward. Then I think our actual tangible dollars could grow accordingly. If I've got a wealthy mindset, if I've got a rich mentality, then I can let my bank account catch up with my thinking. But if I'm impoverished mentally, then it's never going to balance out.
Where do you think that mindset starts?
I think it starts from a broken people. I think that when we have so many broken people in our society, some that do well financially and some that don't, we begin to have to find ways to make ourselves feel better, going back to that emotional spending. And so broken people, as opposed to getting counseling or walking with Christ, I won't say finding Christ, walking with Christ, or finding ways to heal emotionally from whatever it was that broke them, whether it was some type of abuse, whether it was abandonment, whether it was something that happened in their life that left them in a trauma-exposed state. We begin to fix that trauma financially, or at least attempt to, as opposed to being poured into the way that we need to. And then it creates a cycle of, I'm still broken, but I'm now making emotional decisions to fix that brokenness or fix how I see myself or how I think people look at me. And as long as I have these things in place, then I can at least look okay. And as long as I look okay on the outside, then nobody ever has to know what's going on the inside. That's why I think Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat, I think that's why all of them have the allure that they do, because I can give you this picture of me and it can be on my best day and I've got my hair done and clothes on and I'm standing in front of somebody else's car, or I'm standing in front of this picture that behind me looks so mystique that it makes it look like everything is going so well. But inside, I'm torn up, I'm broken up. I don't know how to fix that, but I can fix this outside. And I think that is just carried on generation after generation after generation of people trying to fix an inward issue with an outward look. And I think it's just created a monster of an issue that we've got to begin to sincerely start walking through and addressing.
For those who are not Christian, how would you modify your answer?
I think I tried to cover all, because some people don't believe in having a relationship with Christ, but they do believe in trying to get help, professional help to walk through. Some of the things that are broken within us, we can't fix on our own. So we need to sit down with a therapist, or we need to sit down with a counselor and say, hey, you know, this is where this line of thought is coming from. This happened to me as a child, or this is what I experienced, or this is what I watched. And we always need a professional to bounce off those thoughts. We need to know if we've shaped these patterns of thinking based on whatever that brokenness was. And if so, let somebody gently walk us through, not condemn us for thinking this way, but gently walk us through the healing so that we can identify, okay, man, I was approaching these from a position of being antagonistic, or the hurt that was speaking out in how I handle my job, or how I handle people in community, or how I handle transactions. But now that they've made me aware of that, now maybe I can go back and change, and I can approach things from a different perspective. So it's not just the spiritual walk that we have to do. It's absolutely a walk that we have to be willing to approach, knowing that we can utilize somebody else to walk through it with us.
I think that you hit on something earlier that was very powerful for me to hear, and that is that we love to try to solve our own problems. But we are, there's something about our mentalities that brings that problem to the fore, which is why your answer is so apt that we need to look for external sources for help. And that, as a parent, I think that it's hard because we all feel so vulnerable and we all feel so judged for so many different reasons. I really appreciate your answer. Now, I've got one more question for you, and it actually ties into that last answer. What is your favorite charitable cause that you just love?
I have so many, I think, that are near and dear to my heart. You know, you and I know that Money Smart School of Finance, I love for how they've always taught Darlene, and how she's always taught people to understand from an early age on what's going on. Here recently, in my span, since I left the state of Missouri and came to work with Midwest BankCentre, I work with the Heartland St. Black Chamber of Commerce. And the reason I think that bears speaking about now is because the chamber is working with all of our chambers to level set. So that means the Hispanic chamber, the Asian chamber, the Bosnian chamber, to work well with our corporate community to make sure all of those business owners across the board are building capacity so that we can grow who we are as a city. As every city, these communities have to grow alongside with it. So my heart is in working with all of the business chambers to do that piece as well. But I also like the work that we're doing with the Urban League as they continue to grow, and then with the United Way. Those are my four, because under those fall so many other organizations. The United Way has its education program that works with the Unbanked Task Force. The Urban League has its Save Our Sons and Save Our Sisters programs that are bringing in people to talk about financial literacy from all of the differing partnering banks. We've united together to kind of bring everybody together so that we can lift our community together as opposed to people focusing on isolated silos.
Yeah. Those are wonderful organizations. Give me a little bit more depth on the Urban League, what its mission is, and maybe your favorite story about things that they are doing.
Here's what's really cool about our Urban League. Under the leadership of Mike McMillan, we actually are the number one urban league in the nation. And
Wow.
That's pretty cool. Our city is ranked number 27, I want to say, amongst other cities. But under his leadership, he's been able to take us to be the number one urban league in the nation. And with that being said, they've created a number of great programs that are helping to grow our community. This year, they celebrated their 100th anniversary, and their focus is on empowering communities and changing lives. They did so by just putting together great programs. I want to say the mission of the Urban League, and they may get me, but I know they've worked in businesses, they work in housing, they work in making sure that education is a big piece, community empowerment, economic opportunities, and I know that they work in civil rights as well. But they've put together programs that partner from every age, dealing with Head Start, dealing with children early on, to they actually have programs geared towards our seniors. And then they deal with everybody in between. So they help people find housing. They help people get prepared to, once they're in housing, be responsible once they're already there. They help people find jobs. And so they take people and walk them through training programs regardless of what their background was, training programs so that they can prepare them for jobs that are out here in the community. And then they form great relationships with companies to hire these people that they've taken through trainings. They help people. They have the Laheed Heat program so that when people are in position to their lights are getting cut off or their gas is being cut off, they can go to the Urban League and get funding to kind of help them, just like they can any of our community action agencies. Or they help them build their homes, not build homes, but if you're already living in a house and it's not ready for the change in weather, they go in and do weatherization for you, help you get the stripping and the other pieces that make it one focus well. Their Save Our Sons and Save Our Sisters program is growing men and women and growing families.
Yes.
So they're doing a lot. Even in their partnership with the Heartland St. Louis Black Chamber of Commerce is bringing the part along to help us grow our businesses so that it can be a totality of helping families grow together. So they do a lot of counseling in all of those areas. They have a lot of programs that they're working on. Mike McMillan has just done a great job at how he's grown it to the strength of where it is today.
That is a terrific shout out, and I really appreciate it. Veta Jeffery, it has been a total pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
George, you're a joy to work with. Keep up the good work, and I'm excited to see how you continue to grow this path for many to get educated. This is awesome, and thank you so much for having me.
Everybody else, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the interview and found useful ideas about things you can do with your kids. Be sure to check the show notes at www.choosethenickel.com for links to names, books, and other resources we discussed in today's show. Also, please subscribe to our newsletter and visit our contact page where you can give us feedback. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube, and you can follow Choose the Nickel on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We invite you to share Choose the Nickel with your friends and join us in our quest to teach kids financial freedom.